Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So, not today, but tomorrow is the 10th anniversary of your first appearance on the Weekend Blog with me. It's not the 10th anniversary of your crowning as co-host. You were a guest star. Perhaps an informal tryout.
Bill Butler had to be taken down.
That's right. Now, had you done bloggings before that with somebody else?
Yeah, the first episode I ever did was at the Republican. I think this is true. I think it's true that the first Blogging Heads episode I ever did was at the Republican convention in 2008 in Minneapolis with Anna Marie Cox.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And all I remember is that my lighting was horrible, so don't look it up. Well, it's not a good look.
And nothing's changed.
I mean, my lighting still is pretty bad, yeah. But you know, we're gonna do not a whole episode, but we're gonna do like a deep dive, like a half-hour talk about you and me and what we've learned, because this is like longer than the Korean War. I mean, this is like math. We've been doing this for a decade. Like, the world was different, man. I didn't have kids. I don't think you had kids. It was, and anyway, but there was a time. I don't know if this ever happened to you, but there was a time like when I first started doing Blogging Heads, where they would send out like a tech expert to my house,
right,
to set up like lighting and to upload the video, because like we bloggers were not expected to know how to do this ourselves. Right. You remember that?
I do. Well, I never got that kind of service, but I remember folks in D.C. getting that service. But we'll go deeper into the 10 years next month. It'll be sometime next month.
A very special DMZ episode.
Now, it is Wednesday morning. We are taping just before Michael Cohen gives his testimony, but we've seen the written testimony because it leaked the previous night. This is the perennial question: does this change anything for Republicans?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so, because nothing. We've seen so many crazy things, and I wrote a piece at the Daily Beast this week talking about just the week in general, putting aside Michael Cohen, which was the president's attorney and fixer, and the revelations and the confirmations and about corruption and the unseemliness and seediness and all of that. If you put that aside, you also have a president who's been sucking up to a murderous dictator of North Korea and legitimizing his nuclear regime by meeting with him.
And calling him his friend.
That they fell in love with him, actually. You have the emergency declaration story, which is ongoing. The House just voted a resolution against it. Of course, now it's going to go to the Senate, and then the president would veto it, and you would need 2/3 to overturn, which won't happen. But that's, in my opinion, a huge story about presidential overreach, the usurpation of. I mean, it's really dictatorial, and we can go into why I think that's true. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something, right? There's just so much craziness, and nothing changes. And like, I think we've normalized. The point of my column is we've normalized Trumpism, and it's kind of baked into the cake.
And your piece came out a day or so after the big Lindsey Graham profile came out in the New York Times by Mark Leibovich, where, I mean, here's a guy who ran against Trump, was one of the most pointed anti-Trump voices, was raising the alarm that the only wall Trump is building is between Republicans and Hispanics. And now, he predicted that they would lose with Trump, and he was wrong, of course. But he is someone who has been pretty invested in modernizing the Republican Party so they wouldn't be the party strictly of old white Christian males, and has clearly given up that fight, because not only has he sucked up to Trump, not only has he at times seemingly abandoned his foreign policy principles in defending Trump when he does things like suck up to North Korea, which is the kind of thing that usually drives Lindsey Graham over the edge. As someone who was terribly critical of Barack Obama anytime he functioned in a diplomatic way and wasn't, saber rattling. But he also defends Trump on the wall. And something what he was explicitly critical of before. And so instead of Graham maintaining his posture, he says to the New York Times, I'm trying to stay relevant. I'm trying to win re-election. The re-election part is sort of the least admirable, but you could make an argument that, look,
you can't govern if you don't win.
Right.
And how effective is Jeff Flake and Bob Corker for the cause?
Right.
Not very, right? They're not very relevant anymore.
So Graham has seemed to make the calculation that I'm going to help normalize Trump.
Right.
I'm going to not call attention to when he does things that violate our principles and our sensibilities, so I can remain in the, if not quite inner circle, the outer circle, have his ear and try to push him in a better direction. And I don't know where you exactly come down on this, but it would seem to me that whatever merits that might have in theory, where's the evidence that's even working? How is Lindsey Graham getting Trump to a place that would make Graham happy on any of these issues?
I think there's an argument. If you look at, Trump was ready to do a complete withdrawal of Syria, which I thought would have been disastrous. I think we're going to abandon our allies, the Kurds, which would have sent a big message of don't ever work with America again. You can't trust them. I think Graham probably has helped walk Trump back from the ledge and talk him into leaving some residual forces behind. It's going to keep Turkey probably from slaughtering the Kurds, and maybe keep ISIS from, reforming the caliphate. So Lindsey Graham, there's an argument that he is making a difference. I think Marco Rubio.
Do we know that's Graham though? Is that Graham or the Pentagon?
I don't. Who knows? I think it's probably unknowable whether Trump would have done this anyway. But I think Marco Rubio, if you look at Venezuela, where I think the president has shown some moral clarity and strength, that's an example of where I think probably Marco Rubio, and maybe Graham too, but I think Rubio especially, has had relevance and influence by virtue of not completely attacking Trump. So my point is, I'm not justifying it, and if you read my column, I think you'll see that I'm very hard on these guys. But I'm grappling with it. I think it's a little more complicated than some people think.
Just as a quick aside, I would recommend people read the Dan Dresner op-ed on Trump in Venezuela. And I'm not on the side of Maduro. I certainly think he's bad news. But I think even if you agree in the main that Trump should be recognizing I forget the opposition leader's name. Forgive me.
Guaido.
Yeah. He made a strong case that there's a serious competency question here in the Trump team in this regard that should really make you wonder: are we going to just stumble into an outright civil war here? I'm not a Venezuela expert. I'm not a scientist, man. I do want to say one of the things I think is fascinating about this emergency declaration resolution that's now headed to the Senate. So there are 13 Republicans in the House who I think bravely. I'm very critical of Republicans, but let's give them credit. People like Will Hurd, Mike Gallagher, Elise Stefanik, Justin Amash, who is one of the probably becoming one of my favorite Republicans, very principled, libertarian Republican from Michigan. For some reason, it feels like Michigan and Wisconsin are punching above their weight. Maybe that has something to do with the social capital that exists in Wisconsin. I'm not sure.
But the thing that I find interesting about this order, this emergency resolution, is right. So there's almost been this binary choice where you can either have influence and relevance with Trump, or you can keep your integrity and your dignity. And you have to choose. Are you going to have Lindsey Graham has chosen relevance and influence and re-election over looking like he has integrity and dignity, all right? Some people have been able to try to walk the line. And we're going to see where they come down. So like, I'm really curious, for example, where Ben Sasse is going to be. I think Sasse is up in 2020. He could be vulnerable to a primary potentially. But where does he vote on this? This is a guy who really ought to believe in institutions and in the rule of law and the separation of powers. Ted Cruz is somebody who went around talking about being a constitutional conservative. I'm going to be very curious where Ted Cruz votes comes down on this. So we'll see.
I feel less. I'm less curious about Ted Cruz. He's saluted a whole lot in the past couple of years. Ben Sasse is more of a question mark, I guess. Maybe Rand Paul is a question mark.
I want to see where Rubio comes down on this too. I mean, again, to me, this is a vote that forces them. Up until now, it's been possible to try to play the game of having your cake and eat it too. It's been hard. Trump has made it very hard. It's almost mutually exclusive. And I think this is the vote that really, in my opinion, is a red line.
So now, since there is a House vote, you said it in your previous column in the Daily Beast that Republicans who vote to support Trump on national emergency are dead to me. So all those Republicans, every last one of them, outside those 13 in the House, you've written them off. You will never get behind those folks.
I mean, I don't know what that means, but I can tell you that in my mind, I don't respect those people, and I wouldn't vote for them. And I mean, to me, we talked about it last week, Bill, but to me, this is such an important vote. It's a fundamental vote because, look, the president said, I want to do something, and I need Congress to say yes. And Congress said no. And then he said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So what that means is that he doesn't need Congress, that Congress doesn't matter. That I think he's usurping what should be the authority of the legislature. I think that is really provocative and authoritarian. And if they are going to enable him to do that and set this precedent, it's not just about this wall, it's about the precedent, the doors that Trump is opening that cannot be shut. That's not a small thing. I can't just forgive that. Now, maybe they don't care. So dead to me, I'm not sure that's a writer saying something interesting. But yeah, it's a big deal, and I'll never look at them the same. I can't just forget that.
So let's bring this back to Michael Cohen. So we know from the prepared testimony that he's going to say Trump wrote a check for hush money while he was president, which raises the prospect that he literally broke the law as president. That he heard directly from Roger Stone that Roger Stone was in direct contact with Julian Assange and had a heads up about the emails are going to be leaked. And that Trump was negotiating with Russia over Trump Tower during the campaign, so that he had denied in the past. And I mean, there's other tough charges in there, like Trump saying racist things, for example. But those would have the same specter of law breaking that some of the other things do. And forgive me if I'm forgetting some of the other allegations that are in there. So I take from what you're saying, you don't expect to see Republicans jumping ship over this publicly because they have actively normalized his presidency.
Yeah. And we keep moving you keep moving the bar. Like, what's the old line from Louisiana, where was it Edwin Edwards? I'm trying to. A dead girl or a live boy, right? I mean, what would we have? Trump said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. I think he was right. I mean, what we would have to have? What kind of video or photographic evidence of Trump and Putin, like literally with a smoking gun, would we have to have before Republicans would turn against Trump? Now, there may be legal stuff that that moves the needle, but in terms of new information, just allegations or even corroboration, like causing, you got to realize what happened yesterday, Bill, was only 13 Republicans decided to stop the president from neutering their, their branch of government. Why would anything change?
I mean, that to me, I think is in some respect a bigger deal in terms of conservative principles. To say we believe that conservative constitutional government doesn't allow a runaway executive. Now, mind you, there are conservatives who believe in the unitary executive not too long ago with George W. Bush. So perhaps if you're a unitary executive conservative, this isn't a violation of your principles. But for those
I guess they think Congress is just there to advise and consent, like not even consent, just to like weigh in, like we think you should do this, but do whatever you want. I mean, like in this worldview, the president just does whatever he wants, can call it an emergency, whether it is or not. It's not an emergency. Can just call it an emergency. I mean, that is not a Republican form of government. That's anyway.
Well, I want to go down a little bit of an historical rabbit hole, just for the heck of it. In the Jacksonian days, the Whig Party came about as a reaction to Jackson because they thought Jackson was becoming too powerful and executive and not giving Congress its proper deference. And that was the glue that bound the Whigs together, even though they disagreed on other things. Eventually, like slavery, and the first Whig president was William Henry Harrison, and his vice president was John Tyler, and John Tyler had defected from the Democrats because he didn't care for Jackson's expansion of powers, but he otherwise wasn't all that aligned with Henry Clay on other issues like, Clay's American system, for example. So when Harrison dies a month in, Tyler's not on the same page as the other Whigs, and he begins to become pretty comfortable with exercising executive power himself. And the most dramatic example of this is there is a dispute between the residents of Maine and Great Britain about where the border is. And it has the potential of actually flaring up into violence, into a war. And this is after War of 1812. And so Tyler becomes part of a scheme to illegally take federal money without notifying Congress to fund a propaganda effort to convince Mainers that what they think is the border is wrong. And arguably using fraudulent maps to make the case.
This is more of an Iran-Contra analogy, which I think is actually, I would argue, less egregious than what Trump is doing.
but even Iran-Contra saw the same thing, because Iran-Contra was violating a congressionally passed law that you're not allowed to fund the Contras, and saying, well, screw what Congress says, we're going to do it anyway.
Good point.
So if I mean, this is just not even telling Congress what's going on, which is in the case of John Tyler and Maine. And mind you, the plan works. The plan works. And they draw the
Congress
line.
don't know won't hurt them.
Congress doesn't know what's happening. They draw the line in a way favorable to Great Britain, and they avert a war. So, but people who become president or in their parties in power as president somehow get a different view of how valuable executive power is often the case. And so we're seeing it again with Trump and the national emergency. So perhaps in this case, there's nothing new here about the malleability of conservatives when it comes to the parameters of congressional government.
But see, no, the interesting thing about that is that your story suggests that things are somewhat cyclical, that you get a strong man like a Jackson, and then there's the market corrects itself, and you can go back to a time of normalcy. My concern is that it's more linear, that once doors are open, they can't be shut again. I hope that the cyclical story is actually truer than the linear story.
Well, I think there's a really long history of presidents pushing the boundaries on their power. And what shuts the door on them is the Supreme Court. They don't always, but to the extent that there is a guardrail there, it generally is not Congress. It is the Supreme Court. They have functioned in that way before. I mean, they did hem Harry Truman in on the nationalization of the steel mills. They did hem George Bush in on Guantanamo. So it's not like they never do their job in that respect, and they may well do their job again in the case of the national emergency and the wall.
We shall see. I think my concern is that if the world were static, then I think the cyclical theory would more hold true, right? The world doesn't change. Politicians test the bounds, are rebuked, learn the lesson for 50 years, and then someone else tries it, is rebuked. But the problem is that the world is dynamic. And so now, like Donald Trump operates in a different world, like Twitter and Fox News and all sorts of technological changes, that would Nixon have gotten away with it today if he had Fox News, for example? So I'm trying to figure this out, but it's really, as much as I love history and the whole, those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat it, I think there's also a danger in looking to history as a predictor of the future because it doesn't repeat, it rhymes or whatever.
Right. Well, and to get back to the specific Cohen allegations, I would think one of the main reasons why many conservatives won't be upset at it is they don't see Trump working with Russia and Putin to thwart Hillary as a violation of their principles. Their principle was to stop Hillary.
Right.
And Russia and Putin are not representative of a political system and an economy that is antithetical to the capitalist American way of life anymore. If this was aligning with Brezhnev, it might have been a different story. Aligning with Putin is not aligning with a communist government. It doesn't affect how America does business. And so I think for a lot of Republicans, it's not a problem that he found a foreign ally to help him stop Democrats. It's a positive.
No, I think that's an interesting point. Like, in my view, like, my dislike of the Soviet Union wasn't solely based on the fact that they had a different economic system or that they were atheistic. It was also that they were like a menace and imperialistic and provocative and just an evil empire. And I don't see in my view, Vladimir Putin, a former KGB agent, is just like the 2.0 version of that. So I don't see a big distinction, but apparently I'm weird because a lot of my brethren do.
No, I mean, I think there are people like the late John McCain and what had been Lindsey Graham and Bill Kristol. They see that through line that, they may not be communist anymore, but they're still autocratic and they're still imperialistic, and that history goes back a long, long way. And I think
if you're gonna threaten us, intimidate us, mess with us, invade other countries, it doesn't matter that much to me if you're doing it in the name of like Karl Marx or the name of Vladimir Putin, right? I mean, like, I don't get it.
Well, but I think there's a strain of the right that has existed for also a long time that is primarily authoritarian. That had sympathy to Mussolini and sympathy to Franco and sympathy to Pinochet. And so this is not incongruous with that. And look, you can say there are strains of the left that are partial to Fidel Castro because they put economic socialism above democracy. So it's not like it is solely a purview of the right to have those kind of flirtations, but I think those flirtations have existed for a while.
My kids think the president should just run things. I mean, it's the most simplistic worldview possible.
My kids think Trump should be in jail.
Well, my kids don't like Trump, but if you start questioning them about like what should the president, whoever that is, be able to do, it's pretty much whatever he wants, because that is a very simplistic. No offense to my kids, but they're 8 and 6.
Right.
And so I think that there is a tendency that transcends left versus right. That we want someone who's going to get things done, and a strong man. That's what people want, right? And so look, it's probably not a coincidence that Justin Amash, the libertarian, and even Rand Paul, we'll see how he votes, but Rand Paul in the Senate, I don't think he's come out officially. I think it's Tillis and Murkowski and Snow.
Collins.
Snow's not there. Collins. I think only 3 have officially said that they're voting for the resolution, but like Rand Paul, at least rhetorically, we'll see, but rhetorically has been strong. I mean, it's like
you would need a 4th if Democrats unified, and maybe that's not. Maybe I shouldn't assume that. Maybe Joe Manchin or a couple others go with Republicans, but if Democrats unified. And you had 4 Republicans, McConnell would have to say, I'm not going to put this on the floor because I know it's going to lose. Or
he has to put it on the floor.
It's privileged. It's got.
I think it has to be, but then of course it goes to Trump, who will veto it, and they'll never get the 2/3 majority.
Sure, but it is possible that it actually gets to Trump's desk if one more Republican gets on Democrats stay unified.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to happen then. Yeah, I would say that would probably happen. But I don't think it's exactly a profile in courage if you get 4 Republicans to stand against, this Caesarism.
But I want to ask this about Cohen. So I think we're in agreement that
you keep wanting to talk about Cohen, don't you?
Was one question I want to ask you, though. You keep getting distracted. Are you aware of quieter, private conversations amongst conservatives in the Beltway that saw the Cohen allegations from yesterday, from last night, and are saying more quietly, oh, this is not good. This is not going to go to a good place. So I don't know if this is tenable for Republicans. Is there any chatter like that happening that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. But look, I do think, I could just tell you personally, it's a guy who was his confidant for years, who knows where the bodies are buried, who has audio tapes and signatures and checks. And it would not surprise me if, just like Al Capone and just like Bill Clinton, that it is not the actual crime that brings down Trump, right? And by this I mean that it's not collusion with Russia or whatever, but that there's some sort of illegal dealings. And then the question is, which we've been talking about this one for years: do you go after Trump for a crime, something illegal that is not directly related to the Russia stuff? And is that good for America? Is that healthy? That's the good question. Perjury, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, you name it. These are all things that are not the fundamental thing that we've had a special counsel looking into.
Right. And I imagine it's going to kickstart more conversation amongst Democrats about impeachment hearings. And I can't. I mean, I might need to.
I can tell you that I've been hearing from conservatives. Can I tell you what I have been hearing from conservatives?
Sure.
Two things. One, that there will be impeachment hearings. Like, the Democrats are going to do that. They believe that. And two, the rumors about Clarence Thomas,
that he might retire.
I'm hearing them, man. I'm hearing them. So, and this is like not just BS. Like, right. Who knows, right? Who knows? Maybe Clarence Thomas may not even know. But I'm hearing from people who are serious people who are talking about this.
So if Thomas retires after this term, so it would be in the summer of 2019. Okay, so McConnell would not be forced to have to confirm a justice in an election year and violate his Garland standard.
Well, by the way, they'll do it. They will do it in a heartbeat. Right. It's not even a question.
Right.
If there's an opening in 2020,
sure,
Republicans, without blinking an eye, will confirm the justice.
But if that happened in the middle of literally a presidential election year with Trump on the ballot, that would obviously be.
They will do it.
I'm not saying they wouldn't do it. I'm not saying they wouldn't do it, but it would be a point of discussion in the presidential campaign.
Hypocrisy matters, Bill? Do you think hypocrisy matters at all at this point? Come on.
But this would be the year that Thomas could do it and avoid putting into an election year and giving Republicans a free shot to replace on Trump's
Trump
watch.
Could end up, I hope RBG lives many years. But Trump, there's no telling how many justices Trump could get. And that's going to feed into the Democrat desire to pack the court.
Well, you're already seeing some of that. I mean, I think Buttigieg has suggested that. I don't want to malign him if he hasn't, but I feel like he has mused about that.
It's going to the drumbeat for that is going to have to be. I mean, it makes perfect sense, especially in a world where in my opinion, this is part of. I saw something the other day. I don't know if this is true, but it was like AOC was going to become a teacher, and then Trump radicalized her into becoming a politician. And that would make perfect sense. The unintended consequences of Trump. And I think that, his violation of norms, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I think it invites more. And I can go back to Harry Reid, right, with the nuclear option. I mean, Trump didn't invent this, but he has exacerbated it.
Well, I disagree at that point.
Disagree.
I think that I think the Reid case is different because it was a response to very virulent obstruction that was unusual. They were saying you can't put people on the DC circuit because you just can't. And that reached, I think that was a breaking point for Obama Reid saying, come on. We're not.
I'm willing to admit they had their reasons, and then Republicans will be like, but what they did to Robert Bork or what they did to Clarence, go back to Clarence Thomas. I mean,
my point there is
both sides have contributed to the breaking down of
both
norms.
sides contributed to the eventual elimination of the filibuster for judges. I think that's true. And there's escalation points on both sides of the ledger. I don't think the net of that is a erosion of norms because it has evened out. And Democrats don't like hearing this. They don't really believe me on this point because Trump is the one who has the upper hand today. Right. And they did thwart Democrats on the Garland seat. I'm in no way defending that. But if you look at the course of the last 40 years on these things, it has generally been a wash. Because the court is saying that the openings always churn. Eventually you get your crack at things. I mean, when Reid did that, Obama got a lot of lower court judges that evened the score and actually tilted the lower court judiciary in favor of the Democrats. And now it's the needles drifting the other way. But it's not like it doesn't eventually come back again. I mean, and once that filibuster is gone, that's the thing, you lose the filibuster, you get wilder swings. And for courts, that's not that big of a deal. That keeps things generally calibrated. I think it would be worse for legislation, because then if no law can stay on the books for a few years, then you don't have very stable government. I think that's a much bigger deal.
That's a valid point. What was I going to say?
Well, I want to.
I'm sorry, real quick. You said Merrick Garland. I think that no one ever brings this up, but look, I totally get how it is uncool and all that for what Mitch McConnell did, but it's not like Garland was going to pass. Like Republican senators. The other option was you give him a hearing, maybe he comes across as very charming and likable, and Republicans vote against him. And then there's an election, and then Donald Trump picks the next, right?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the Garland weeds, but let's just remember, like the day before the pick, Orrin Hatch says, they'll never pick a great guy like Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland would be the right guy to pick. Man, that guy is great.
I'm willing to admit, Obama selected a guy who was as moderate as you could expect a Democrat to pick, and not young. I mean, he's an older, not old, but
he was a straight up compromise pick.
He's the best pick you could have hoped for from Obama, and Republicans, but they were still going to vote him down. So my point is,
if Orrin Hatch had honor and decency and stuck to his own comments from like 48 hours before, what would have happened then?
Well, I don't know. Orrin Hatch in memoriam, he's no longer in the. He's been replaced by Mitt Romney. So,
but I want to get back to the broader question about Democrats and norms, because I think you're correct. Well, there's two conflicting data points here. I wrote a piece last year, which no one will ever read again. It'll be thrown back in my face many times because it's headlined "Michael Avenatti is winning the Democratic primary," and the argument of the piece wasn't Michael Avenatti is going to be the nominee. It was that he was.
I thought he very well could be. I will defend you to the hilt on that. I mean, Avenatti actually got a whole lot of momentum, and I also think what you're about to say is totally true, and that it's representative of a larger symbolic thing.
Well, he was actively pushing an argument that Democrats should not be bound by norms. And he was explicitly pushing court packing. And I believe he was talking about eliminating the filibuster, but forgive me if I'm not remembering that correctly. But I know he was talking about court packing. And that whole general ethos that Democrats shouldn't be bound by what's tradition, because Republicans would do it too, so we should just do it first and get our stuff done. Often I was representing that as a candidate, and you could see other candidates responding to that pressure and beginning to edge in that direction. Now, since he is not there, because he got hit with these domestic violence allegations and he bowed out, on one hand, I think you're right. There's still talk about court packing, and that's still percolating. And there's still talk about eliminating the legislative filibuster, certainly amongst the activist left. And that's tied to Green New Deal, because a lot of Green New Deal advocates are saying explicitly, we know this can't pass with 60, ergo you should get rid of the filibuster. Bernie was asked by John Dickerson from CBS the day of his announcement, and Bernie says, I'm not crazy about getting rid of the filibuster. And a lot of his people were like, what are you talking about, guy? You're not getting any of your stuff done without getting rid of the filibuster. David Dan, who writes for The Intercept, he tweeted out, who got to Bernie? What institutionalist got into Bernie's ear and flipped him on this? So I think there's some question how far Democrats will go because there isn't an Avenatti in the race. But there are certainly other activists that want to pick up that baton and push Democrats in this direction. And certainly if Ginsburg passed away or retired, I doubt she'd retire, of course, or if Clarence Thomas retires and they get another pick there, that would definitely kick up court packing.
Amy Coney Barrett mania.
Now, what doubly annoys me about my Avenatti piece is that I took that opportunity to make my case about FDR's court packing and how that was a political negative and very disastrous for him, which is not the common narrative on the left. And no one's going to read it again because it's buried under his headline that doesn't apply anymore.
This has happened to all, Bill. This is the business we've chosen. I've had the same thing happen to me.
Now there's another
piece is done.
There's another piece that came out in Politico this weekend, which added an extra wrinkle to the FDR court packing story. And it backed me up on my point, which was that the argument on the left generally is, sure, FDR didn't get to pack the court, but by being bold and pushing the envelope, he pressured the court, and they flipped ideologically because of it, and he lost the battle but won the war. And where that falls apart is the justice that switched, Owen Roberts, actually had written out his switch in an opinion that had not been published yet before FDR made his announcement. So the switch is already in place. Now some argue, well, there were some rumors about it before then, and they were reacting to those rumors, and that may be true. But the bottom line is that might argue for the threat is more powerful than the execution. If FDR didn't have to go as far as actually doing it to get the result that he wanted, and once he did do it, there was enormous political backlash. And it alienated the conservative Democrats in this party and pushed them towards the Republicans. So it harmed his ability to pass further New Deal reforms that he wanted to do. Now the Politico article I just ran the other day said that that FDR himself was careful in how he constructed the proposal, and I'm gonna probably not articulate this properly because I didn't prepare for this conversation ahead of time.
This didn't come up in our extensive pre-planning session. Right.
But it basically argued that there was an issue about justices and retirements, because back in the day, the Supreme Court folks didn't have good pensions, and they were more apt to retire on their own accord to go get other work. And I think once the pensions improved, that gave them incentive to stick around and, pad their hall. And so FDR constructed the bill so it wasn't straight up, I'm just adding seats and sticking people on. It was going to induce retirements, and so you'd get more natural churn. But he also made the point that it all became politically messy and unnecessary because Owen Roberts made a switch beforehand. He made that point too. So,
well, look, there's nothing written in stone that says there has to be 9 justices, and this is the kind of thing that Trump, these norms that Trump has violated, they're not statutorily defined. But I do want to say, I'm more outraged by the fact that your column is now lost to history, and the problem is that we are forced to make things news, to tie them to news pegs. And we also have headline writers who will put timely news pegs in. And I'll give you, I had a piece in, I think it was 2014, Bill. I was thinking of the analogy for me, Matt Lewis' hardest hit. And I think whenever the piece was, years ago, before Trump, there's a piece out there at the Daily Beast you could find about how Mike Huckabee needs to be paid attention to, how Mike Huckabee could be more dangerous than you think or whatever. And of course, no one's ever going to read that because it's laughable that I was saying, watch out for Mike Huckabee. But if you read that piece, which is way before the rise of Trump, I go into detail about how on the right, populism is the most underserved market and how it is ripe for a populist to come along and demagogue and to win over working class voters, in middle America. And yet I can never promote that piece because the Mike Huckabee headline. So I feel your pain is what I'm saying.
This is an opportunity to write a new piece where you just plagiarize yourself, slap a new headline on it, and get paid for another article.
I don't know. I mean, the plagiarize yourself thing. Come on. Anyway, hey, I not to change the subject, but I want to give a shout out to to my buddy, friend of Matt, Jamie Weinstein. Did you see the CPAC agenda he put out?
No.
Did you see this? Jamie put out it's
no. Jamie's a podcaster for the National Review.
Yeah, he's got a great podcast. I highly recommend it. It's actually no longer with National Review.
Oh,
he's out on his own now.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, check it out, the Jamie Weinstein show. But Jamie put out this great satirical. Some people think it's real. That's how crazy things are. But he put out a sample agenda for the Conservative Political Action Conference taking place later this week.
Is it this week?
I think it starts Thursday.
Oh wow! Are you going?
I don't know. Only if I have to. But CPAC used to be a big deal, and the fact that you didn't know that it was happening is indicative of how it's lost its relevance. Because it's people like Diamond and Silk giving the speeches instead, whatever. But Jamie put out this agenda. So the first session is from Edmund Burke to Charlie Kirk. TPUSA's Charlie. And so then there's another one that's like Candace at like 8 a.m. Candace Owens speaks, and then it's like 8:35. Charlie Kirk explains Candace Owens' remarks or apologizes for them. Anyway, he's got the whole thing. It's just brilliant.
We'll check that out.
Yeah, check that out.
Anything else you want to plug before we call it a day?
Yeah, but I think I mentioned my pivot to video, which was a home run. I interviewed Kristen Soltis Anderson, the pollster, and
former co-host of this show.
Yeah, that's right. She's been a guest co-host, right? She was never an official co-host.
No. She was a regular. If I remember correctly, she was alternating with you for a time.
Okay, well, that's right. Because there was a while when I was every other week, right?
Right, and she was the other one, and this is when it was still the Weekend Blog.
Damn. Okay, we're gonna have to.
Did you not talk with us with her? Did my name not come up with you guys?
I talked to her for an hour and 10 minutes. You can find it on YouTube, and we had some very interesting conversations. I mean, she's an expert on millennials, but she has this book called The Selfie Vote. But she had been on like Bill Kristol's show recently and Jonah Goldberg's podcast recently. So we touched on that and the impact that Donald Trump's presidency could have on millennials for generations. As baby boomers die and Gen Xers die. Hopefully that'll take a long time. But anyway, we only spent a little time on that. But we talked about 2020. And we talked about her days fronting a ska band, which was interesting. And but maybe the most interesting thing we talked about was what pollsters got wrong in 2016 and how they can fix it in 2020. And so check that out. I tweeted some of the cool clips out, but it's also on YouTube as well. You can watch the whole. It's an hour and 10 minutes long. And my next video interview, because what I'm doing is I'm still having my podcast, Matt Lewis in the News. People can listen to it on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. But some of them, when I do it in D.C. face-to-face, there's going to be a video. And the next one I'm doing is next week with Arthur Brooks, who has a new book out. And I'll be talking to him on video about that.
Very exciting. And check out my most recent Real Clear Politics column. I weighed in on the Dianne Feinstein Green New Deal controversy. That is up over at realclearpolitics.com. And I guess we'll talk next week.
You got it. All right. Thank you, Bill Scher. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show, and see you back here.